A dovetail halving joint, and the tools we will use to construct this joint are as follows. We will use a mallet for striking the chisel, a steel straight edge for measuring and drawing straight lines, a steel tape, a combination gauge that is a mortise gauge and a marking gauge, a tenon saw, and a set of beveled edge chisels. Here we have a drawing of what we're making, and we've got some dimensions on there that hopefully our finished joint will look like. We start off again putting face side and face edge on the piece of our timber. This is usually the best face and best edge, but not always. We're going to set out first the middle piece where the housing is going to come from. So we measure along there and we find that the centre of that is 70 millimeters. We put a little mark, and we need now to transfer the width of the timber, which is 44 millimeters, so half of that is 22. From this line we now square a line across the wide face with the stock of the square on the face edge. We position our piece of timber so as it just covers the line to make the joint nice and tight. Mark on and square the line across the face again. We're now going to continue our line halfway across the narrow edge on the face side there, face edge, sorry, and we do the same on the other side. Note we're not going all the way through with our lines, so we can tell which side the joint is coming out of. We now set out our second piece of the joint, and we make sure that it is flush, and we put a little mark on the edge there. Note we are marking this out on the back side of the joint, but on this occasion we will actually need to square across the front because we've got to mark the dovetail shape on the front of the timber. If it was just an ordinary housing joint, we'd only need to draw it on the back side. Note how the lines all join up because we're using the square off the face side and face edge. We now need to position the dovetail, and working off the drawing we might measure in 10 millimeters along the line that we have just drawn on. Just highlight them a little bit so we can see where we're working. And now we need the introduction of a dovetail template. A dovetail template is an implement by which we can put the pitch of the dovetail on, and it will be the same every time. It saves having to use a sliding bevel. The angle that the dovetail will be at in softwood will be 1 in 6, and if it was hardwood we will be able to decrease that to 1 in 8. We're going to find out where the centre of the timber is now, so we know what depth the housing is going to. And it's 16 millimeters deep, and we set our gauge to that. By setting the gauge up off the face side and gauging both pieces off the face side, we can ensure that the piece that we take out is the same as the piece that we leave on, so the joint will finish up nice and flat. And again we're gauging, pointing at the camera, whereas really we should be in the vise so we can have both hands on the gauge and we get a much crisper line. But at least this way we can actually see what's happening. Highlight the pencil line so we can see where we're going, or the gauge line. And now it is time to remove the waste piece of timber. We're hatching in the waste piece. We don't always need to do this, but it's a good idea when we're just learning, so we don't cut the wrong piece off. Draw the saw back about 3 times, make a little track, then we sew along the top and we go down for a depth of about 6 millimeters. Once we have made this track in the top, we can then angle the piece of timber over and we can sew down each side. And this means that the saw will run in the track at the top and we can concentrate on following the line down at the side. On this piece we have now turned it round the other way and we have sewn the little triangle out of the middle as well. We're putting the bench hook in the vise so that we can now cut off the shoulder. Please note that we haven't tried to cut the dovetail shape out until we've removed the back piece of the joint. Working along the line there and cutting square down and taking care not to cut too deep. Nice and easy as we get to the bottom. We square the top of the dovetail over. And note that the piece of timber is set at the angle, so the actual dovetail line is set up plumb. As we get a little bit more competent, we can have the piece of timber straight up and cut the dovetail lines on an angle. Note we're very carefully following the dovetail pitch down the timber. Easy as we get near the bottom of the joints. Same on the other side. And as we get to the bottom, we then have got to cut the 2 cheeks off of the dovetail. Taking care to leave the line just on so that we don't take too much timber off. Be careful here because you can ruin the dovetail if you just take a little bit too much out. Same on the other side, and we remove the excess bit there. Here presto, we have a dovetail. It only remains now to mark this dovetail shape on our other piece of timber and cut out the housing to suit. Sometimes as well, before we draw around it, we will ensure that the dovetail or the piece of timber is sitting square. We mark on either side and we can draw those 2 lines using a straight edge. Note we're using the square as a straight edge now, not a square. We square the line down just halfway on both sides, and if we wanted to we could hatch in the centre portion as well. Now while the marking gauge is still set up, we gauge off the face side in between our 2 new lines, not our rolled lines, because we don't want excess gauge line leaving in once we've cut the joint. Highlight the gauge line, again off the face side, always off the face side. We're now going to cut that out, and we've got to remember to cut on the waist side of the line. A good tip is once we've cut the first cut, is to put your dovetail piece of timber back on again and just see if your line which you're going to cut next time is in the right place. If it isn't, we can adjust it. We can adjust pencil lines, but we can't adjust saw cuts. And once the gap is too big, then the joint is useless and we can't use it. Nice and easy as we go down, and the joint is now ready to be chiselled out. You can see we've just gone up to the gauge line with the saw cuts. Now, using our same chiselling technique, we chisel up to halfway, making a little V so as we don't break out at the other side. We turn the piece of timber around and repeat the process from this side. We remove the little mound in the middle so that the housing is nice and flat. And then we remove any little bits of timber that may stop the joint going up in the corners. It wants to be either perfectly flat at the bottom of the housing or just very slightly dipped in the middle. Just clear out the edges again, and we fit the two pieces together, and can you see how they're just a nice push fit, and that joint will not need any securing methods other than adding a spot of glue. A half flat dovetail.